Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Hi, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy at Passionate World Talk Radio Network, where we educate, enlighten, and entertain. I want to thank Jeannie White for producing the show, and please read the blog because it will have information about our guest. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio Network. And actually, today is March 8th. It's the day of the International Day of Women. So just to put a word out, Passionate World Talk Radio Network was started by Lillian Caldwell. And so thank you, Lillian. And I salute you and Jeannie, station manager. Thank you for the work that you do. Folks, you know, when I listen to this podcast, were you a flower child? Do you remember the Beatles? I know I do. And I was, and I still am a huge Beatles fan. Well, you're going to want to listen to my guest, Dr. Susan Shumsky, who wrote the book Maharishi Me, Seeking Enlightenment with the Beatles Guru, which won 13 book awards. Thank you, Susan, for coming on Chatting with Betsy. Welcome.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Betsy. I'm so glad to be here with you today.
I'm glad you are, too. Your book sounds so exciting, and I've, researched a little about you. You lived a phenomenal, interesting life. You were with the Maharishi you worked with him for 22 years. I know you were on his staff, but then you worked in different areas.
Yes, I was with him in his various ashrams for over 2 decades, and I was on his personal staff for 6 years.
Wow, that is incredible. I have to ask you what I ask every author who writes a book is, why did you write the book, number one, and number two is, what would you like the reader to take from your book?
Well, this book is a memoir, and the reason I wrote it was because an editor at, I think it was McGraw-Hill, asked me to write it, and then very soon after she did that, she was laid off. so that didn't exactly work out. But still, I did write the book, and I'm glad I did. And then I started writing it in 1998, and it took until 2018 for my agent to actually find a publisher for it. But that's because it went through various incarnations of what the focus of the book was. And then finally it came together. And what I'd like people to take away from this book is to really understand what it's like to be living with a spiritual master from India, what that world is like and what it's like to receive spiritual experiences and to have that association, that connection with spirit, and also the connection with a great enlightened spiritual being.
That must have been very fascinating for you because you were 19, so you were young when you.
Yeah, I was 19 when I first learned Transcendental Meditation. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was the founder of Transcendental Meditation, and I learned that during the Summer of Love, 1967 in August, and the Beatles learned TM just a few weeks after that, actually.
I remember the Summer of Love. I remember the Monterey Music Festival.
Exactly.
Which was before, Woodstock. So that's so cool because you have like that connection to the Beatles, but not just the Beatles went to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, but Mia Farrow and the Beach Boys, the
Mike Love and
Mike.
Brian Wilson and
yes,
the Beach Boys. In fact, all the Beach Boys learned TM. The Grateful Dead, the Doors, many of the groups at that time, the rock groups were, they got into Transcendental Meditation at that time. So and Mia Farrow, of course, and more famous celebrities got into TM and are still getting into it, even now.
How did you get interested in TM? What made you interested?
We were flower children of the 60s. And, that wasn't just all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. In fact, it was about experiencing what we called altered states of consciousness at that time, because our gurus were Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who later became Ram Dass, and they had written a book called The Psychedelic Experience, which was basically a manual for taking LSD, and it was based upon the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And they told us to turn on, tune in, and drop out. So that's what we were trying to do, and they said that the way to attain nirvana was through taking LSD, so we tried that. That didn't work out very well for me. In fact, I had a major psychotic break as a result of taking LSD. It was a horrifying experience. I really never came down from the drug for weeks and months. I was continually having these LSD flashbacks. It was absolutely terrifying and horrifying, but I still wanted to reach nirvana. So I was reading the Buddhist scriptures. I was reading Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. I was reading books by Alan Watts. And in Alan Watts' books, he said that you have to find a meditation guide. Well, trust me, in 1966 in Berkeley, California, you didn't exactly go to the Yellow Pages and look up meditation guide or anything remotely similar. So I asked a friend, well, how do I find this meditation guide? And he said, well, have you ever tried to meditate on your own? And so I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I lay down on my bed. That's how clueless I was, Betsy. I didn't even know that you're supposed to sit up when you meditate. I lay on my bed.
I didn't know that either.
Prayed. Yeah, I didn't know that either. Yeah, right. So I sort of prayed for or asked for a meditation, and immediately I was propelled into this ecstatic state. So I felt this cord or rush of energy rushing from the tips of my toes all the way to the top of my head. And I felt like I was plugged in to a cosmic electric socket, but in a most ecstatic way. And I figured, well, I guess this is meditation. Little did I know that not only had I had my first meditation experience, but also Kundalini awakening all at the same time. And then it was not too much longer that a friend took me to the Transcendental Meditation Center. And that's where I saw the picture of Maharishi on the wall of the center. And I could feel this energy exuding from the picture and from his eyes, really more precisely. And I could just feel that this energy, that this was where I would learn real meditation. And so I did. And then not long after that, I went to India and studied with Maharishi.
What was that like? That had to be one incredible experience. Was he nice? Was he, how was he?
Yeah, well, being in India with Maharishi was an amazing experience. And we were in very sparse accommodations, like outdoor toilets, outdoor showers, and just kind of cinder block habitations with a cot, a thin mattress, and just very, very sparse. But we were experiencing bliss inside because we were practicing meditation, and it was an amazing experience of spiritual awakening, expansion of consciousness, and great devotion, really. Immediately I felt very devoted to this person, Maharishi. So it was a wonderful experience for me, and I was quite young when I went there. I was like 21. I turned 22, I think, when I was there. Yeah, I turned 22 there at the ashram. And I stayed there for 6 months. That was in 1970. And then really I ended up staying in his organization, like I said, for 2 decades.
And what made you decide to leave after 22 years?
Well, I found another form of meditation that I liked better, and I wanted to teach it. So that's why I left the organization.
I had to ask you this, Susan. What were your parents thinking of you going off into, to India and being with the Maharishi? Because back at that time, go ahead.
To tell you the truth, Betsy, they were relieved and thrilled because no longer was I taking drugs and having sex with every man that walked on the street. I was actually doing something productive and going to India to study and to become a meditation teacher. So they were thrilled about it, frankly.
Oh, well, they probably thought that was better than what, you were doing, like you just stated, because back at that time, especially, young women didn't travel like they do now, overseas. Being with the Maharishi, how did it change you in so many ways?
It did. It was a very, very important transition in my life because I was a very shy person and not much confidence and that sort of thing. And he really helped me to come out of my shell, I think, because his training, the way he would train people, like I said, I was on his staff for 6 years, and his training is sort of like you could you could liken it to a military drill instructor or something, simply because he would have you do things over and over and over and over and over until you got it right, and as you're doing things over and over and over, you're getting better and better and better at them, whatever the task is, In my case, I worked in finance and I worked in art, in the art department because I'm an artist. I did helped design his publications and illustrations, and I worked in housing. I did a lot of different tasks, and in every case, it was a learning curve. It was very interesting the way he would train people.
Did he train people to let go of their ego, like strip you down so that you could start like all over?
Yeah. That's the reason why I likened him to a military drill instructor, because, they do the similar kind of thing like stripping your ego down. And Maharishi did that a lot. He did it in a compassionate way, but it was brutal when it was happening. And you'd go through like ego lifting and then ego squashing, ego lifting, ego squashing. It would be a seesaw, a very, very intense, incredibly emotionally intense seesaw that you'd be going through. This was for people on staff, people who were close to him. This was not for the general public. The general population, right. Maharishi trained 40,000 teachers to teach 6 million meditators during his lifetime. So he was really all about mass, let's teach the masses to meditate so that we can lift the vibration of the planet, so that we can have world peace. That was his objective. But for people that were close with him, like me, they got the real guru-disciple experience. It was different.
I would imagine you had to fit certain criteria to work that close with the Maharishi, to be on his staff. I'm sure he didn't just pick anybody. I'm sure he was very selective.
No, I think it was very selective simply because there were very few people on his staff. But I think it really had more to do with the desire of the disciple, really. I very much desired it, and I asked him for it, and he accepted me, You have to ask, and you have to be wholeheartedly wanting to have that experience. Otherwise, just like anything else in life, you have to make decisions, and you have to be firm in your decisions, and you have to, if you really want to manifest things, especially extraordinary things, you have to be very persistent and determined and have an absolute will, an iron will at doing things.
And of course, for people who don't know this that are not baby boomers, the Beatles were greatly influenced by the Maharishi and spending time with him in influencing their music.
Absolutely. The Beatles were very greatly influenced by Maharishi. They actually went to India and studied with him. Ringo stayed for 10 days. Paul stayed for 5 weeks. But John and George actually stayed for several months. They were there from February till April of 1968 with Maharishi in his ashram in Rishikesh, India. It's kind of extraordinary when you think about it, that they actually took that much time out of their lives and hang out with Maharishi.
Yes, I remember when, they came back, and then their clothing, their music all changed.
Right.
I was, I remember that. I'd like to ask you, Susan, to tell the audience as to what do you do now that's with your meditation that's different from the transcendental meditation. Can't talk.
Right. Right. So transcendental meditation uses a mantra. It's a specific form of meditation. It's great. I definitely recommend it to people to learn transcendental meditation. I just like the meditation that I practice and that I teach. I like it better. The meditation I do is called Divine Revelation, which is, it's more devotional, shall we say, and also it's more direct. It's more mystical. It's like having a mystical experience of the divine presence and being able to communicate directly with Spirit, with a capital S, having two-way conversations with Spirit, and being led by Spirit, being guided by Spirit in everyday life. So I happen to like it better, and that's the reason I practice it, and that's the reason I teach it.
That sounds very interesting, and I think more people are looking for something now to calm them down, to give them hope, especially during the pandemic. I'm curious to ask this: has your business picked up during the pandemic, as far as people seeking to meditate and to have peace?
Yes. I mean, the thing is, more and more people are meditating. In fact, 10 to 14% of the population, depending on, who took the survey, claim that they meditate. That's a huge number of people. 10 to 14% of the population says they meditate. I don't know exactly what they're doing necessarily, but they say they're meditating, so it must be. And this is a time when people need meditation because of the stress people need to learn how to calm down, and also they need to learn how to develop their intuition, because at this time we can no longer depend upon institutions that we had relied upon in the past. We need to become more self-sufficient and learn how to listen to the inner voice rather than depending upon outer voices telling us what we should do. We need we really can't rely on that anymore. We have to go within and learn how to develop our intuition so that we can make decisions with peaceful confidence.
And do you hold virtual trainings Susan?
Yes,
for
I do.
people to be able to do that?
Yeah, I hold workshops on Zoom and so on. And also I'm very, very busy writing books. I have another book deadline on June 1st, and that book is called How India Influenced the Beatles. And I just finished another book that's called Prosperity Meditations. That's not yet available even for pre-sale. I just delivered that manuscript not long ago. And so I'm always writing a lot of books. Like I said, I'm writing this one right now about the Beatles.
That's awesome, Susan. How do people purchase your book, The Maharishi and Me?
Yeah, the book is called Maharishi and Me, and you can get it anywhere that people buy books. I recommend, because of the pandemic, I recommend something called IndieBound. IndieBound. IndieBound is a place where you can find local bookstores to buy books from. And I really recommend people support the local businesses. I really recommend that this is the time when we need to support local small businesses. So that's why I like to send people to IndieBound to purchase all my books. I have 20 books, 36 foreign editions. I've won 40 book awards, but there are 20 in English, and you can look it up at IndieBound. My name is Susan Shumsky, Shumsky.
And it will be the blog, but for people who may not read the blog, do you have a website to be able to contact you about your trainings?
Sure. drsusan.org is one of my websites, drsusan.org, and also divinetravels.com. That's DIVINETRAVELS. That's plural on the travels, divinetravels.com.
Excellent. I had to ask you this, Susan, because I am such a big Beatles fan. And so is my husband, my son, who's 36. He loves the Beatles. He's a big Beatles fan. How was it having that connection? Like, did you feel a special connection to the Beatles because of Maharishi?
Yeah, I do feel a special connection to the Beatles because of Maharishi. I feel so familiar with him, which is odd. You know, these big, giant celebrities, the biggest act since Moses parted the Red Sea. I mean, these unbelievably famous individuals, I just feel somehow that they're part of my family or something. It's very strange. And I think a lot of people feel that way. There's something about the Beatles and something about their music that touches people very, very deeply. And it's their message. All you need is love. That's their message. All you need is love. That's the epitome of the Beatles. And in fact, in their song The End, it says, the love you take is equal to the love you make, you know. And really, it is all about love.
Yes, I really just, love the Beatles. My brother recently passed away. He loved the Beatles, and he had all these Beatle T-shirts that he left behind, and my son is able to wear them, and he just loves wearing the Beatles T-shirts. Oh. And it's really very cultural. The Beatles expanded all different cultures and countries, and it's kind of funny in a way. I live in a town known as Little India, and we have a huge Asian Indian population. And when I would tell, I worked in a preschool, the parents about, how the Beatles, and of course they were young, so I had to tell them who the Beatles were, they went to the Maharishi, and George Harrison learned to play the sitar with Ravi Shankar, and they looked at me like how do you know that? Like they brought the Indian influence over, and the clothing, and the hippies wore a lot of what people would think as Indian clothing, but the hippies wore it way back in the 60s. It seems so far away, yet it seems like yesterday in some ways, of how they just really influenced our culture. And it goes back to the Maharishi. So that's pretty fascinating.
It is. I mean, the Beatles had a huge, huge impact on the culture of the entire world. And, but, they were they were flower children too, And when you were a flower child, the hip thing was anything Indian, anything from India, incense from India, and smokes from India, hashish, and
right.
Clothing from India, tie-dye, and
yes.
all the clothing, various embroidered clothing and so on. So, the whole culture turned India, that counterculture. It wasn't the culture, it was the counterculture. And we were part of the counterculture. And so anything India was hip. And then other spiritual masters came to the United States, like Satchidananda and Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, who founded ISKCON, that George Harrison got into, and many other spiritual gurus arrived on the shores of America and were very welcomed because that was the thing. That was the hip thing at the time. And then the Beatles, who started using Indian instruments in their records, and all of a sudden you found the tambura and the swarmagal, all these odd instruments, the sitar and so on, were being used in what they called raga rock. And that the first raga rock record was Norwegian Wood by the Beatles, where there was a sitar that was played very badly by George Harrison. He played it like a guitar. He didn't know how to play a sitar, but it sounded different, and it was in tune. It sounded good. It sounded great, but it wasn't played correctly. He didn't know. He hadn't even met Ravi Shankar when Norwegian Wood came out. He just bought a sitar and plunked on it, put it in on the record. So that was the very first pop song that ever had an Indian instrument on it, Norwegian Wood. And then they used, for example, Within You and Without You and Love You Too. Those were full orchestras. Those were full Indian orchestras, not played by the Beatles, by the way. Those were all played by actual Indian musicians, because it takes decades to learn how to play, for example, the tabla, which is the Indian drums. You can't just plunk on it. It doesn't work. You have to practice for decades to learn how to play those. Very hard to play the drums and really hard to play anything except for the tambura. The tambura is the only thing, the drone instrument. But you have to know how to tune it. You can't just try to. They're all hard, all the Indian instruments. So they had Indian, they would hire Indians to come. And then also, for example, George Harrison did the soundtrack for Wonderwall, this movie, kind of hippie, psychedelic movie that was done at the time in 1968. And he went to Mumbai. It's now called Mumbai. It used to be called Bombay. And he went there, and that's where it was recorded, was right in India. The Indian part of the Wonderwall album and the Wonderwall movie was recorded there in Bombay.
Oh, that's interesting, information. And now in the year 2021, guess what's coming back? Tie-dye is very big this year. As I looked at the stores, the maxi dresses, all the things that, were popular in the late 60s, early 70s are now coming back around in style. Yeah. And, the Beatles will always be, to me, they'll always be in vogue. People will always still listen to the Beatles because they just phenomenal.
The reality is that on the 50th anniversary of the White Album, the album went to the top of the charts. The Beatles are still number one. I mean, they've sold more records than any other pop group ever. I mean, it used to be Elvis was on top, but that's long has been the Beatles have beat that record. So they are number one. Paul McCartney, who's like a dinosaur, he's so old, but he actually has had more than 50 million hits on Carpool Karaoke. I mean, he's so hip. He's the hippest
he's
guy.
Still
on
rocking.
He's still rocking.
Yes.
He's about to another book of his is coming out. A book is coming out in November about his song lyrics. Anyway, the Beatles are still in vogue. You're right.
Yes, I still think Paul McCartney is still cute, especially considering his age, and still can, rock it out. I remember when I was, I don't know how old I was, but I remember the Beatles being on Ed Sullivan and dancing. And back, then, Susan, there was big cameras that our parents had, and there was no sound to it. So my sister and I were dancing. That brings back a happy memory. Thank you, Susan, for coming on, chatting with Betsy. I appreciate you coming on and talking about your book. Folks, go out and buy or order online the Maharishi and Me by Dr. Susan Shumsky and read about her experience. It's really very fascinating, the life that you lived there, and 22 years. I mean, that's a long time. That's pretty amazing. And I just want to, thank you for coming on and sharing about your book. And if you're interested in what Dr. Susan Shumsky has to offer with meditation, look her up. You have nothing to lose and all to gain. So I encourage audience to, go to your website and to, check out what you have to offer. So thank you.
And thank you for inviting me, Betsy.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And your next book, just let me know. You're welcome to come on.
Wonderful.
Talk
thank
about
you.
Your next book. You're welcome. Folks, I have to mention, disclaimer, the opinions of the guest may not represent those of the host and the station. I want to thank Dr. Susan Shumsky for coming on, talking about the book Maharishi Me. I think it's a fascinating book. I recommend reading it and going on Dr. Shumsky's website and just to get familiar with it, and it might be something there that you like. You never know unless you go explore. In a world where you could be anything, folks, please be kind. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy at Passionate World Talk Radio Network. If you missed any of this podcast, you can catch it again on your favorite podcast stations. On Spotify and Spreaker, just to mention a couple. And please subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. It's free, and you'll just never know who I will have on as my guest. So with that, until we chat again, take care and be blessed, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the Internet.